The job of a watchman is to pester God. It doesn't say, just pray. No, he says, give him no rest. In other words, get on his nerves. It's like the parable of the woman who needed bread. She kept knocking on the, and by the way, this is what I love about Jesus. This is a parable about the Father. And essentially, if I just put the Father in there, the Father says, I'm not giving it to you because I'm kind. You've annoyed me. You have so pestered me. You've knocked on my door so much. Here's the bread. Here, like, get out of here. That is the sort of prayer culture that God calls us to. Okay, Isaiah chapter 62. Let's read this for a second. Because I want to give context to the watchman call. Because one of the things when we think about watchmen, anytime we think about anything that's connected to earthly things, like Jesus being king, watchman, we have to think about it differently than even the way we naturally understand it. And here's what I mean. Most of the time when we think of the responsibility of a watchman, we think of somebody on a watchtower looking out for the enemy that's coming, right? That's what most of us would think. I realized this a couple years ago. I was in this big prayer thing for Israel, and I was praying Isaiah 62, and it hit me, the Isaiah 62 watchman. And that's usually when we're talking about being watchmen, intercessors, we're talking about the Isaiah 62 watchmen. They're watching out for something different. They're not out on the watchtower watching out for the enemy that's coming. Look at this, Isaiah chapter 62, verse 6. Now this is specific for Jerusalem, but it can be applied for anything. On your walls, O Jerusalem, I have appointed watchmen. So this is the first thing I want to point out. The Lord appoints watchmen. That means if we're not watching, we're missing out on our corporate assignment. And most of the time we're not watching. If we're distracted, we're being lullabied to sleep, whether it be entertainment, media, our own lives, whatever it is, we miss out on the watchman assignment. Okay, all day and all night, they will never keep silent. That's pretty specific. This is like everything we got, we're watching. Let's keep going. Now, what do? You who remind the Lord, take no rest for yourselves. Verse 7. And give him no rest. So this is what you do. You remind the Lord, we're gonna look at that in a minute, but the job of a watchman is to pester God. It doesn't say, just pray. No, he says, give him no rest. In other words, get on his nerves. It's like the parable of the woman who needed bread. She kept knocking on the, and by the way, this is what I love about Jesus. This is a parable about the Father. And essentially, if I just put the Father in there, the Father says, I'm not giving it to you because I'm kind. You've annoyed me. You have so pestered me. You've knocked on my door so much. Here's the bread. Here, like, get out of here. That is the sort of prayer culture that God calls us to. It isn't like I'm excited for an hour and I did my duty. It's pester me until I move on your behalf. I don't know if we know that yet. And I think the reason we don't know that yet is because we're not urgent enough. Now, I've seen people, if their spouse gets like stage 4 cancer, they kick into a drive of prayer, but they'll do anything. They'll get pastors they don't even like to pray for them. And they'll everything they got to do, but for everything else, it's like we're like in neutral. That's not the Isaiah 62 watchman. The Isaiah 62 watchman pesters God until what? Go back a few phrases. You who do what? You remind the Lord. What is the job of a watchman? It's not to watch out for the enemy, it's to watch out for the promises of God. That is the role of a watchman. Now, in the context of Isaiah 62, they're watching out for the fulfillment of God's promises to Israel, specifically the city of Jerusalem. And they're saying, hey, you said you would do this, and you're not doing it. You're not a man that you should lie. And then they take shifts to pester God and say, if you don't do this, you're a liar. When was the last time you prayed like that? I remember I sat with Ray Hughes having breakfast the day Reinhard Bonnke died. It just happened that way. We got up that morning, I'd stayed at his house, we go to have breakfast, and Reinhard had died. And he was, telling me times he met with him. And I said, Ray, why don't we see healing like that anymore, at least in America? And he said, because we're not desperate enough. He said, see, back in those days, they'd get up on the microphone and they'd say things like, God, if you don't heal this person, it's your reputation on the line, not mine. I was like, I don't know if I'd ever do that. But I've thought about that since then. I don't think we want the things that we talk about bad enough. Like, sometimes we love the act of praying intensely more than getting the thing that we're praying for. So again, look at the context of Isaiah 62. These are people that are taking shifts saying, Lord, you said you would do this. If you don't do this, you're a liar. Your whole reputation is on the line. Not my reputation, and they take turns until God does what he says he's going to do. For example, Isaiah 62, he's making specific promises for the city of Jerusalem. He is going to fulfill those promises. When? When enough people get on his nerves in prayer. Are you guys with me tonight? And I'm not so much harking on the generation thing, but I feel this from the Lord. I think it's time that we learn how to get on God's nerves in the place of prayer for a generation. Well, we learn how to pester God so much that we force him, because here's the point with the woman that comes for the bread. What was the issue? What did he tell her? It's nighttime. I'm not even open. There's no bread ready. He forced her, she forced him to move quicker than his intended timing because of the intensity and the persistency of her prayer. Do you guys hear me?